let me show you how well Ukraine's counteroffensive is proceeding. You know, that's kind of that's the gist of it. You've got smoking German and American tanks, you know, up in smoke. You can see there's a Leopard here, where my mouse is, where my cursor is, and next to it are a couple of Bradleys, which are American armored vehicles. You know, that's about the gist of it. And so this is the much hyped Ukrainian counteroffensive, which you know they've been trying to sell to you in the media for months, and even now as it's going up in smoke, and Russia's defensive positions are working, they're still trying to convince you, oh, no, Ukraine's definitely going to win. It's just going to take time. And we promise you, the Russian soldiers, they're about to collapse, you know, like they have no morale. Ukraine has the morale, right? Ukraine, they have high spirits. Ukraine have Western equipment, right? Russians don't know how to build tanks. They caused 80% of German casualties in World War II. Oh no, it's not like the T-34 crushed the Germans on the Eastern Front. The Russians are idiots. No, these Western tanks are much better. We promise you. Really? Just to give you an idea how crazy this is. The Russians are taking some of these vehicles with such speed in such a, you know, in one fell swoop, that oftentimes they're finding the engine is still on, like the vehicle is still on. Okay, look at this video. They barely, you know, taking the crew. The goddamn thing is still on.
О, что там, Ромаха? О, ты граник. РПГ-22, да? О. А вот он, фрисовский нахваленный леопард. О, их две техники работают. Это Бретли. Ну вот. Не так уж и страшна эта техника. Вот так вот.
Look at them. They're all piled up. They're piled up. It's like some boy playing with his toy tanks. You just throw them into one. I mean, it's crazy. I'm you know, I obviously these are anecdotal, but when you've got video after video popping up of these you know, armored vehicles being crushed like this. I mean, just take a look. This video is like 10 minutes of armored vehicles being hit. It's one after the next, right? Some of them with mines, some of them with drones. In this case, you can see that, right? The videos really speak for themselves. Right there, you've got this guy down here running away. And keep in mind, this is not a tank. This is a howitzer. It's an artillery cannon. He knows what's coming. He's running away. And I don't blame him one bit. That's what you should do. Now the question is, why is this happening? Why are the Ukrainians and their much hyped counteroffensive, you know, why is it not working out? What they'll have first is they'll have what you call dragon's teeth. So these are kind of they look like concrete pyramids that they drop into the ground. Actually, they'll put them on the ground, but if you have time and you're able to actually dig them into the ground slightly, even better. They will hold even better. The whole point about, you know, this is that you're going to block mechanized infantry. So basically troops that have armored vehicle support or just armored vehicles period. So tanks and APCs. APC stands for Armored Personnel Carrier. You know, sometimes they have turrets and guns. You'll have a cannon on top and perhaps a machine gun, you know, 7.62 millimeter next to the driver's seat or on the sides. But, you know, they are mainly, as the name implies, they're mostly made for carrying troops, right? Could be 5, could be 10, doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, these are armored vehicles. The whole point of the dragon's teeth is to stop them dead in their tracks, no pun intended. Now, if they're somehow able to get past the dragon's teeth, past these concrete pyramids, what the Russians have done is they've dug these anti-tank ditches, right? Or I mean, it's really like a grave, like literally, because tanks can drive over small gaps, up to a certain extent. But when you dig these so wide, the tank is just literally going to fall in, and there's no getting out. It's that simple. It sounds so rudimentary, but that's what's going on, right? So just so you can see here on the map, these are a couple of examples of multiple lines of defense, right? And so after the Dragon's Teeth and after the anti-tank ditches, you'll have trenches, right? So when I say trenches, I mean like, World War I trenches, but actually a bit with a few improvements. Instead of digging them in straight lines, because if somebody jumps down into your trench and they can see all the way through, I mean, it's pointless, right? Because you can take the whole thing in a much shorter time. These trenches are zigzagged, right? It provides better cover for the troops that are fighting from these positions, and in the case that in the event that the enemy are able to get in, it's going to be much harder for them to take. They can't see what's maybe a few meters ahead. Okay, so that's when you see all these zigzags, that's what's going on here, right? So this will be a trench system over here. And of course the tree lines, right? Don't forget about the tree lines. Trees provide a natural cover and camouflage for them to put the armored vehicles or artillery inside of, right? So these are things that will maybe be a second, third, or fourth line of defense. There's no absolute order for these things. It depends where you are and what you're trying to do and defend from, right? So actually, they did a really good job here of explaining them. I walked you guys through this last time, but look at these illustrations. They're so simple. If you dig this, man, there's no coming out of there, right? This is an APC, Armored Personnel Carrier. These anti-tank ditches, it's game over. Here are these Dragon's Teeth, right? The concrete pyramids. And you might, if you've watched some World War II movies, you might be more familiar with the hedgehog barriers. But they kind of, accomplish the same thing, right? At the end of the day, they serve the same purpose. And something that I expected the Ukrainians to know their own weather, and certainly the Russians as well. Starting from March, you have what is known as mud season in Ukraine. Okay, so you end up with tanks with armored vehicles that are literally stuck in the mud. And these things, they have so much horsepower, but there's no getting them out. So sometimes you find tanks that are just abandoned like this. Okay, so all of these things need to be taken into consideration. And even after the obstacles that we discussed, there are mines, right? So these entire areas will have mines in front and behind, right? So obviously the troops planting, or the Russians in this case, planting the mines, they know what to avoid and what not to avoid, what they can actually use. But in a lot of cases, you're going to have mines seeped into the soil. So you have these Western tanks given to Ukraine, trying to plow through the Russian defenses. They're getting bogged down in the mud. They're getting hit by mines. And then as soon as they're detected, the Russians are sending in drones. And so you end up with a carnage, with a massacre like this image here. That's what you end up with. They don't stand a chance. It's really sad, honestly. You got a bunch of young men killing other young men for what? You could have, in a matter of days, diplomats sitting down, presidents sitting down and hashing this thing out. What's the point of all this? It's so unnecessary. But there you go. This is happening nonetheless. And I want to show you the difference in composure and in confidence. Okay, so take a look at Putin talking about this Ukrainian counteroffensive, and then I'll show you Zelensky, of course, right?
Потеряли свыше 160 танков и свыше 360 бронемашин разного типа. Это только то, что мы видим. Есть еще потери, которых мы не видим, которые наносятся высокоточным оружием большой дальности по скоплениям личного состава и техники. Так что на самом деле их больше, этих потерь со стороны Украины. И вот по моим подсчетам, это примерно 25, а может быть 30% от объема той техники, которая была поставлена из-за рубежа. Вот примерно. Мне кажется, что если они объективно посчитают, они с этим согласятся. Но, насколько я видел из открытых источников, западных источников, примерно так они, мне кажется, и говорят. Вот. Так что наступление идет, и вот результаты на сегодняшний день такие, о которых я сейчас сказал. Да, но наши потери по остальным показателям по личному составу, пускай Минобороны говорит, а здесь, вот я сказал, танков у них свыше 160, у нас 54. Часть из них подлежит восстановлению и ремонту.
Obviously, take everything he said with a pinch of salt because, you know, the Russians are going to amplify their gains and minimize their losses, and the Ukrainians will do exactly the same thing. So if he said 54, you could count maybe 70. We're just kind of speculating here, but you need to understand that at the end of the day, he's a politician. Zelensky's also a politician. Obviously, I expect a bit more lying from NATO just because of the precedent, but you know, that's how it is. Let me show you Zelensky, okay? Here's what Zelensky was saying.
Mr. President, it's very good to see you again. We are now in the early days of this long-anticipated counteroffensive. How's it going? What's the goal? How would you describe progress so far?
I cannot give you all the details. There are both defensive and offensive actions. Things look not bad. I would say it's generally positive, but it's difficult. Our heroic people, our troops, who are now at the front of the front line, are facing very tough resistance. And you understand why. Because for Russia to lose this campaign to Ukraine, I would say, actually means losing the war.
Right, so he sounds a little bit like Blinken. So here you can see now the mainstream media trying to do damage control. Here, this is from Reuters. They said that Ukraine struck in 2 areas along the southeastern front last week as it began the main phase of its long-awaited operation, reporting 7 retaken villages, but also taking losses, including Western infantry fighting vehicles and tanks. 7 villages? What do you mean 7 villages? Oh my God. Man, you need to be retaking cities, entire provinces. What do you mean 7 villages? I can't believe they actually got this past the editor. Like, are we allowed to report that Ukraine is losing and really, really doing badly? Apparently, yeah, they were allowed to say it. You know, they also kind of obfuscated here with saying, you know, losses including Western infantry fighting vehicles and tanks. I mean, losses is putting it mildly. This is a massacre. You know, this is really, really, really bad. And again, you know, these are unnecessary deaths. This whole thing, this whole war in Ukraine could have been, there were like literally decades to avoid this. They didn't care. They just used Ukraine as a battering ram against the Russians. It's a salami tactic, man. It's nothing. You know, it's nothing complicated about it. This is The Guardian. They said that it's clear that this operation will take a while. What do you mean take a while? I thought if we give the Ukrainians our tanks, our far superior tanks that are way better than the Russian junk, that Ukraine, just like that's all they need is our tanks, and then they're going to defeat the Russian bear. What do you mean take a while? That's not what we heard. You were hyping us up, and you give us this? So they say it's clear that this operation will take a while. Ukraine is trying to do something that has not been successfully accomplished, perhaps ever before. Really? Okay. They say they are trying to execute a wide-scale offensive with the use of armored vehicles without air supremacy against an entrenched enemy that possesses a large supply of defensive weaponry. Do you know anything about the Second World War? What does this mean, never been done before? Ukrainians are having to contend with the fact that now they need to send forces forward, including tanks, APCs, and other vehicles, and they must operate in an environment in which they are threatened by a large number of different systems, such as the almost ubiquitous handheld anti-vehicle missile. Well, hold on a second, man, because you were telling us that the ATGM, the anti-tank guided missiles, that the Americans were giving the Ukrainians were the reason that Russian tanks were being wiped out, like a knife through butter. Weren't they saying that last year, around this time last year? They were saying, oh, these Russian tanks are being devoured, right? Thanks to the anti-tank missiles that we supplied Ukraine, or have been supplying Ukraine actually since 2014. I sat through this press conference this morning. I suffered through this. God, it was like 30 minutes long, which is it's longer than they can read, these people. But here's Lloyd Austin and some other general, General Milley, right there he is, U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman. Listen to them talking about Ukraine's counteroffensive, okay?
So, Dan, it would be very premature to put any estimates of how long time on an operation of this magnitude. There are several 100,000 Russian troops dug in and prepared positions all along the front line, and Ukraine has begun their attack, and they are making steady progress. This is a very difficult fight. It is a very violent fight, and it will likely take a considerable amount of time and at high cost. But at the end of the day, as Napoleon once said, the moral is to the physical as 3 is to 1. And
yeah, Napoleon also lost against the Russians, but okay.
The Ukrainian morale, their leadership, their skill, their tenacity, their resilience is very high. The Russians, on the other hand, their leadership is not necessarily coherent. Their troops' morale is not high. They've been sitting in defensive positions. Many of them don't even know why they're there. So we'll see. It's too early to tell, but we'll see how this plays out.
You see this now, like, oh, it's about, we have better morale than the Russians. The Russians don't even know why they're there. They are just propagandized robots that are being sent to the front lines. They have no clue what's going on. But don't worry, right? Because the morale is going to win the war against Russia. Why did you give all this equipment then? I mean, I think they should have just been upfront and said, look, there's no point even giving you this stuff, to get it just for the sake of getting it off our hands. Because you guys, the Ukrainians, you've been using Soviet equipment, Russian equipment for decades. That's what you're trained on. That's what you know. So we'll try and procure those things and give them to you so that you can actually operate, more successfully in battle and you don't end up like this. Because this is just a con job, okay, all of this. This is about giving away the old stock, right? Get rid of the old stock so that we can restock with newer models. And of course, who benefits from this? It's military-industrial complex, right? Whether it's the European military-industrial complex or the American one. I mean, they're really two birds of a feather, right? The idea is the same. And keep in mind, Germany, which claims to be a country that doesn't profit off of wars or get involved in wars or send weapons to countries at war. First of all, they publicly broken this, right? But they were doing this before in Yemen and finding loopholes, right? So instead of sending the weapons directly to Saudi Arabia, they would send them to Italy, and then Italy would send them to Saudi Arabia. Yeah, okay, but it's still a German vehicle, isn't it? So my point here is that, they've got all these older model tanks that some countries in Europe have bought from Germany if they're Leopards, or they have some of them have maybe F-16s that they want to get rid of. So it's about getting rid of them and then buying newer ones from those companies, from Boeing, from Lockheed Martin, and so on, and they get richer, or BAE Systems. There's so much money being poured into this. That's what this is about. It's not about, oh, let's end the war. Because if you were serious about ending the war, you wouldn't do things like this, right? You wouldn't create carnages like this. You would send qualified diplomats who know how to do their jobs, and you would just negotiate and get it done with, instead of having send Boris Johnson to pull Zelensky out. And how's that been going? Like, how many Ukrainians have been killed, and Russians, since March of last year? What good did that do, right? Since they stopped the negotiations, nothing. So they don't do anything diplomatically, right? Or I should say, Washington don't allow Kiev to do anything in terms of negotiations. And then on top of it, when it comes to the battlefield, they say, "Oh, we're going to win with morale." A few seconds ago, you were saying they were going to win with Western tanks. Which one is it? From the same guy, right? Same press conference that I had to sit through.
Through a global effort, more than 6,000 Ukrainians are being trained right now at 40 different locations, training locations, in 65 courses in 33 nations on 3 continents.
It's like this guy just discovered an atlas, you know. Wow, we have things called continents? Oh, no. But he said 6,000 Ukrainians. Do you know how many they've lost in the last couple of days since the counteroffensive began? The estimates are around 8,000, right? So let's say that the Russians are using this figure. Okay, fine. Then tone it down to 6,000 or 5,000. Are those acceptable losses? Dude, it's 5,000 people just wasted like that for what? For this? For 7 villages, according to what was it, Reuters? Yeah, 7 villages. You know, whether you like the Russians or not, you can't change the fact that they've been dug in, and they are not the ones moving forward or trying to move forward. Now it's the other way around. It's the Ukrainians who are trying to penetrate through their positions. Okay, so the advantage is to the Russians, right? They have had all this while to build a giant network, even in Crimea, by the way, right, where you don't have anywhere near. Right? You have stuff happening in the Black Sea, but nothing near the level of conflict that you have in Zaporizhia and eastern Ukraine. So look at this. Just look at how they've fortified since October 2022. Look how much they fortified here. This is a huge line. Now, at the same time, you look at that and say, well, actually, the Ukrainians have luck on their side, because when you have an enemy that is so spread out, you have such a wide line, you have many opportunities to break through, right? And then they look at these tank carnages in the media and say, oh, well, they're testing the Russians' weakness spots, right? Yes, it's true. But, this is beyond testing. Look how many tanks right there. The Russians have been building all of this stuff. It's very difficult to get through. But they've been selling this myth that, all it takes are is our benevolence, right? Our benevolence, our charity, our generosity, and our kindness of giving. Oh, we donate our tanks to the Ukrainians so they can fend off these Russians that we don't like. It doesn't work like that. You have predetermined levels of how many tanks should be in your arsenal in every country. Right? They have different levels. When you get rid of these tanks, you don't just donate them. You need to replace them, right? And you'll have countries saying, well, actually, we retired these, so they're not actually part of our arsenal. What does that change? Have $80 billion plus dollars, have they not been sent towards military packages, military aid packages to Ukraine? They have. That's $80 billion. That's no joke. We're not talking about small fries here, right? So you can spin it any way you like. It doesn't change the fact that this is a money-making machine. And this idea of some, a brilliant Ukrainian counteroffensive, what do you mean you're drone striking the Kremlin? What are you trying to start a nuclear war? I mean, this whole thing is like trying to start a nuclear war. It's like they've lost their brains. They don't understand that, as much as you hate the Russians, you have a balance of power. You can't just go drone striking the fucking Kremlin. Why do I have to explain this? Like these people they've lost their goddamn minds. They have lost it. If you know your Cold War history, just imagine the idea of the Americans, of NATO, sending drones to the Kremlin in the Cold War. Like that sounds crazy. That sounds insane. And yet this is happening. Like this is a thing. This happened. They have lost their minds. Let me show you someone else who has lost his mind. This is Trump's defense secretary, right? So Mark Esper. Let's take a look at what he had to say.
It's a very significant moment. Everybody is looking to Ukraine to be very successful. I was in Europe 2 weeks ago for about 2 weeks, and the number one question over there is where.
Wow, I've never heard such why I never heard wiser words imparted. I was in Europe 2 weeks ago for about 2 weeks. Sorry, I'm just making fun. I'll let him say what he wants to say.
Over there is, where is U.S. support? And everybody fairly thinks that if Ukraine does well, U.S. support will continue. If not, it could wither. And if U.S. support withers, then a lot of other countries will go with it. So it's very important, I think Ukraine understands this politically, not just militarily, that they have a very successful counteroffensive that shows people a return on their investment in the Ukrainian military.
We know return on their investment. What are you investing in a baseball team? What do you mean return on investment? He's talking about this like he's sending his child off to some match or something. Like if you do well, then my support will increase, and if you don't do well, my support will wither. I want a return on investment. You know this is a country, right? Like there are people there. Jesus Christ. I kind of appreciate the candor and honesty because he's not joking. He's not joking, right? Like he this is the thing with some people is that they don't know how to, they slip up sometimes and they have a Freudian slip and the truth comes out. Now with Trump, I think, and we'll get to Trump in a second and that whole issue, but he wasn't less corrupt. He's just, he had a big mouth, and they don't like big mouths because you have to play the game and hide it and obfuscate what you're doing when you have, you hold power that big. So let me just play this again because I couldn't believe my ears. I still can't believe my ears. Like listen how he's speaking about this.
Not just militarily, that they have a very successful counteroffensive that shows people a return on their investment in the Ukrainian military.
We know that some groups of
I thought you're donating them because you want to defend democracy and, people's right to resist and all this blah, blah, blah. What do you mean return on investment? What investment? I can't with these people. There's only so much I can take, They've lost it. They think that this is a video game or something, but in the old days, if you wanted to start a war, you're the one at the front. You have to lead the charge, right? But now these people, they become, the people in power, they become too comfortable, right? This guy, not only is he no longer Secretary of Defense, but he's all the way in Washington. He's on the other side of the planet. This is like he's talking about some far off, land where nothing affects. Maybe people like him, it doesn't affect them. They have nuclear bunkers and they have places they can hide, I suppose. And their children don't get sent off to war. But back then, if you wanted to start war, you have to be in the front, right? But now they think that there are no consequences. No, there are lots of consequences. And giving tanks to Ukraine, return on investment. Honestly, the clip speaks for itself. That's it.